We are live.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bernard Siegel. I'm the Executive Director of the Regenerative Medicine Foundation. We have an interesting session today, conversation with industry leader. So we had to select one person to have a conversation with from the entire regenerative medicine and cell therapy industry. And while there are plenty of wonderful speakers and qualified speakers right here in the United States, we decided to reach out at 3:10 a.m. in the morning, Melbourne, Australia, our friend David Oxley. And David is the Senior Vice President, Business Development and Licensing of one of the great pioneering companies in the area of cell therapies, Mesoblast. So welcome to this session, and we appreciate all the chocolate and coffee you've had to be able to be alert right now. And I hope you will share with us a bit about Mesoblast that's been in the news recently.
Thank you, Bernie. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. And yes, it's an exciting time for us at Mesoblast. We all look forward to a PDUFA date response from the FDA on the 30th of this month. So right around the corner. If we're fortunate, we'll have the first FDA-approved mesenchymal stromal cell therapeutic to treat pediatric GVHD. And right behind that is a ongoing phase 3 trial throughout the US to treat COVID ARDS, or what we all have come to know is those patients on ventilators who are unfortunately at very high rates of mortality throughout the US. So it's a very exciting time for the company. We're fortunate to be able to contribute to fighting the pandemic, and we look forward to sharing further news as we learn it in the coming weeks.
Thank you for that. Let me ask you, from a lofty view, what is the state of the cell therapy industry right now from your perspective?
That's a really good question. If we think about it, you and Professor Kaplan and a handful of others really have been at this since day zero. For Mesoblast, it's the culmination of 16 years of development. Dr. Silvio Itescu, who founded Mesoblast, was running transplant labs at Columbia University in New York many, many years ago, and saw these interesting cells in the laboratory setting, and left Columbia in 2004 to start this journey. So the state of the industry today is really at its natural gestation, 16 years into clinical development, and there are 7 programs under Mesoblast's management in phase 2 and phase 3. And of course, as just mentioned, a culmination that potentially will lead to the first FDA-approved allogeneic stem cell therapy ever in the United States. So for many people, particularly patients, hoping and praying that these hopeful cell therapeutics could be available for so many maladies, that day is hopefully right around the corner, and ushering in, as many have said, an entire new industry of cellular-based medicines. We all know about the CAR T embrace in the area of cancer, and I'd like to say that Mesoblast represents that same transformational contribution on behalf of many, many great pioneers that are just behind. Mesoblast has the good fortune of having spent the last 16 years developing these products in an iterative, rigorous way, phase 1, phase 2, phase 2B, phase 3. And so we do have the good fortune of being the first, but certainly not by sheer luck, but by sheer desire to follow a very rigorous path, as one would expect, and as the FDA has absolutely embraced and has been very supportive of.
Thank you for that, David. Right now, the world is facing a number of existential threats, and it's certainly the first and foremost on our mind is that of COVID, a pandemic. And what I wonder, has the cell therapy field and industry in particular now met the moment at hand where there might be applications in cell therapies to treat patients with COVID or COVID-related morbidities?
Yeah, we're all working 24 hours a day. And for us at Mesoblast, that's a very relevant question. In April, so prior to COVID, we were focused on pediatric GVHD. We've got a very robust program in chronic heart failure, chronic kidney disease. There's a whole portfolio of programs underway. And what we do know is these cells are well characterized at this point. And what we do know is they're very responsive to inflammatory signals, cytokines. And the homing characteristics of these cells lend themselves brilliantly to a viral infection, particularly in the lungs. So when you think about it, when you give an IV administration of these cells, the first place they land is the lungs. So in April, we were asked to participate in an emergency IND to treat these patients who were ending up on ventilation. So despite maximal medical care, mortality rate was in excess of 90%. And we were asked to contribute our cells. And fortunately, Mount Sinai is one of our leading partners in our clinical trial, and we were happy to contribute. And under that emergency IND, we saw a phenomenal outcome. Granted, it was small, it was 12 patients, it was a pilot study, but 75% off ventilation and out of hospital in 10 days. And by contrast, in the neighboring hospitals, the same numbers there was a 9% probability. So 75% on getting a cell therapy treatment versus 9% with standard of care. So it was pretty phenomenal, extraordinary, really. That led us to initiate a phase 3 program that's underway. And we're pleased. The first interim look by the Independent Data Monitoring Committee just took place, and we were requested to proceed as planned. And the next interim look, maybe sometime around the end of October, we'll look at the 45% of the patients enrolled. And we don't know, it's a blinded trial, but we're exceedingly optimistic given the nature of these cells and how well they respond to overwhelming inflammation. And of course, GVHD, we all know, is the mother of inflammation, mother of all overwhelming inflammation. So there's great hope for us. And to your question, I would say the contribution that could be made is as equally important as vaccines. We all know what the government has done through Operation Warp Speed to rapidly accelerate accessibility for those fortunate who don't have and aren't infected. But for the unfortunate infected, and that's where we're working 24 hours a day. We've got an entire team in the United States right now, almost sleepless, throughout major university hospitals in the US, treating these patients who end up on ventilation because we know what mortality looks like. Right now it's running at 60%. So think about it, it's a coin toss, really. You end up in a hospital ICU on ventilation, you're running a 60% probability of death, and you're otherwise healthy. So there's great hope around our office right now that this 300 patient trial will conclude, and we will hopefully see a result similar to what we saw in the pilot. We don't know, but we're hopeful.
One of the obstacles, it seems to me, is that both for well thought out academic trials and using MSCs and cell therapies in general, as well as industry, are the resources necessary to proceed. Clinical trials are very expensive. So Mesoblast might have threaded the needle. Other parts of industry might have more challenges, and certainly academic centers have challenges. What is the role in the federal government what you say. And before you answer the question, I want to point out to the audience that David has an orbital view of things and has worked on the Hill and in the executive branch. So he's coming from a lot of different places and joining this session. And we have quite a number of congressional staffers in our audience today that have signed on. So keeping that in mind, what can be done?
Well, so let's recognize what has been done with the same warp speed as the overarching theme here. In my humble view as a former staffer, I think what's been done both by the House and the Senate in passing emergency funding and the administration for coordination and creating a venue and a platform where private and public industry members can come together, put their heads together and come up with plans has led to what we're seeing now, right? Vaccines at the end of their gestation and hopefully in the not too distant future, access for all of us, myself included here in Australia. BARDA comes to mind as a fantastic platform. In America, BARDA represents really an enabler of commercial scale manufacturing at warp speed. We are self-funding our trial of 300 patients. And with any good fortune, we'll see an outcome similar to what we saw in the study in New York. And that will lead to hopefully an accelerated approval. With that said, the notion of a national stockpile, again, I subscribe to a simple thesis. For patients who have contracted this insidious virus, there should be something available to them at warp speed as well. And naturally, the corollary is, well, you're biased in saying that because you're developing one of these therapies. And in fact, you're developing the only one at the moment. There always has to be somebody who's first. There will be others, but the enabling of a local stockpile in the United States absolutely makes sense because at the moment they don't exist. So what more can the government do? In my view, the funding has to remain and the collaborations that are occurring between and amongst agencies continues. But I would suggest there needs to be a focus now on therapeutics for those who are infected, because the reality is those who aren't infected, there is a very significant investment that has already been made towards making boosters available, right? And we also have to look at SARS-1. SARS-1 is with us today. And so the idea that we're going to have a magic bullet that's for those of us fortunate that aren't infected, getting a vaccine is not going to prevent us from contracting the virus. And so I think for you and I and our colleagues in the audience, we all need to at least stop and recognize the value of a vaccine is what it's meant to be, just like it is every year when we go in for our flu booster. Some of us are still going to get the flu. And for those of us who get the flu, what are members of Congress, what is the administration, what is private industry, and what are the regulators doing to think about that day? Because that day is here with us now. And again, I want to take you back to New York in March and April. There was a 9% probability of survivability. The corollary was patients got our cells and saw a 75% success. And so what that says is that bodes well for the value of regenerative medicine playing a very fundamental role in massive, overwhelming inflammation. And so what we all hear in the news is this cytokine storm. These patients, their lungs are filling up with fluid and they're dying. And these patients are otherwise healthy contributions to society. So I guess in summary, Congress has done a fantastic job. The White House has done a fantastic job despite everything. And the vaccine development is well underway. So now it's time for us to, in my humble view, think about what BARDA's strategy pivot should look like relative to answering the question, do we have therapeutics today that we can accelerate from where they are in their gestation to a commercial scale. And we certainly are going to play a part in that at my company. And of course, there are others as well.
So thank you, David, for sharing that. So I would like to have you think in a creative way, as someone that's been on the Hill and understanding the importance of public policy. And it makes me think that the power and reputation of FDA, maybe there's more that can be done. And for that matter, with other federal agencies as well. And if you could make a wish and make it so, think about what the agency or other aspects, other parts of federal government could do right now to bring the promise of cell therapy into reality.
Well, they're already doing a fantastic job, and I'm not saying that. I was listening to Peter earlier talk about collaborations and his surprise that there wasn't already a collaborative sort of theme running through the industry as a whole group, stakeholders, look at this problem and embrace it together. In my humble view, it takes me back to during the Bush administration, when there was a commitment to fight the then very significant challenge of HIV in Africa. And I take us all back to PEPFAR. And the reason why I say that is because Lester Crawford was running the agency back in those years. I'm an old man now, so this dates me. But Lester Crawford, here's what was incredible. And here's what I would say, that the power of Alex running HHS, the power of the commissioner at the FDA. Collaboration is a community activity, and Warp Speed is a fantastic platform for that collaboration. So with respect to cell therapy specifically, in my humble view, the collaboration can exist, and the platform is this Operation Warp Speed. Cell therapy isn't an academic exercise being performed at universities in a lab somewhere. It's provided at commercial scale as we speak. I want to remind everybody, the first commercial cell therapy was fully approved in Japan in 2016. 2016, 4 years ago. And the progressive nature of MHLW, the equivalent of the FDA in the United States, was such that it was fostered by the government. Laws were passed to encourage industry to develop and collaborate with researchers. And all of that fed into what became the first mesenchymal stem cell therapy approved in Japan for the very indication that Mesoblast is now prosecuting before the FDA. And I would say the spirit of that collaboration and cooperation, as you referred to it, in Japan, is being fostered today in Rockville and in Bethesda.
David, it's very interesting that you bring that up in the minute we have left, because by my observation, Japan serves as one model where industry, government, and the research institutions are working in lockstep to try to accelerate something that's very important in Japan, of course, is induced pluripotent stem cells and Shinya Yamanaka's work at Kyoto. Not necessarily following that model, but there is novelty and understanding other models of other countries and the collaborations that they are doing. We aren't in a silo, and I recognize that you are what I would call an international man, and you're wearing a hat and working with Asia for Mesoblast. So maybe as the last, we didn't talk about it before, but maybe in the last minute you can talk about international collaboration and what your view is of what we can look at around the world that might be as a model or what not to do.
Yeah, well, I would just echo your comment that back to your question on collaboration and what can the agencies at the federal level do, whether that's HHS, whether that's FDA, and then the sub-agencies, CBER, et cetera. Congress has done its bit. It's funded the exercise of contributing the public purse. the agency has worked brilliantly at bringing all collaborators together, and cell therapy is now a contribution to that effort. And whether that's looked at in Japan, where the model was successful, and there was a 40% adoption of cell therapy within 3 years. So it's not like the cell therapy was approved and it wasn't really embraced. Literally 40% of the market, patients and doctors, embraced it in Japan. And what I would come back to, and as a closing comment, is what we really can do right now is bring attention to patients and their families in the United States who get this insidious virus, who end up on ventilation, and it's a big number of patients. And what do we do to treat them? We've got an answer for those of us not infected. We don't have an answer. The industry is working on coming up with a solution, but that's where we could collaborate. BARDA, HHS, FDA, and in the spirit of that same White House spirit of warp speed, I think that's a great place for us to start.
And this is a great place for us to wrap up because time is up. David, I can't thank you enough. I hope you can go back to sleep and have a very, very nice, productive tomorrow or yesterday or wherever you are out in Australia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernie.